Chains of the Forgotten Sun. Chapter 1. The Perfect Servant. The sand in the arena wasn't sand. Under the floodlights, it glittered like crushed glass, each grain a sliver of something once useful. Ceramic insulators, powdered composite, the sifted bones of machines. It clung to my bare forearms where the crowd could see it, where the cameras could magnify it, where it could sell the lie that I belonged to this place. A bell tone rang through the dome, not a sound so much as a pressure in the teeth. Main event. The words weren't projected on a screen. They were stitched into the air itself, a lattice of light that floated above the pit in Dominion gold. The crowd answered with a roar that came late, as if the arena had to tell them when to be alive. I kept my head bowed. I let my shoulders sag. I let my breathing look ragged. Obedient. Spent. Easy to read. Across from me, the opposite gate dilated open like an iris. The champion walked out as if he'd been poured from the same metal as the arena. Tall, stripped of ornament, armored in matte plates that swallowed light. A helm under one arm, hair cropped close, face clean and hard, and when he lifted his eyes, empty of the small warmth a living man couldn't help but leak. Kael Vire. The name rippled through the stands. People didn't chant it. They possessed it, like saying it made them part of him. He stepped into the kill circle and stopped exactly on the mark, burned into the sand. Dominion cameras loved symmetry. Dominion loved control. I raised my eyes only enough to meet his chest. Servants weren't permitted direct challenge. Servants didn't look at champions like equals. It took effort to keep my hands from trembling. Not fear, not now. Recognition is a dangerous thing when the wrong minds are listening. The arena's announcer voice rolled down from somewhere unseen, tuned to a frequency that made each syllable feel inevitable. And now, citizens of the Helion Dominion, you will witness the culmination of 20 cycles of trial. You will witness the measure of strength. You will witness... The voice paused, letting anticipation ferment. Kael Vire, the Iron Star. The crowd erupted. Above them, the dome shimmered with reactive holograms. Flares of red and gold, stylized suns collapsing into his silhouette. The Dominion knew how to choreograph worship. They'd built a whole empire out of it. Kael didn't acknowledge them. He looked at me. Not fully. Not with the eyes of a man recognizing a face across years. With the eyes of an instrument sighting a target. My throat went tight. Recognition is a dangerous thing when the wrong minds are listening. The arena's announcer voice rolled down from somewhere unseen, tuned to a frequency that made each syllable feel inevitable. And now, citizens of the Helion Dominion, you will witness the culmination of 20 cycles of trial. You will witness the measure of strength. You will witness. The voice paused, letting anticipation ferment. Kael Vire, the Iron Star. The crowd erupted. Above them, the dome shimmered with reactive holograms, flares of red and gold, stylized suns collapsing into his silhouette. The Dominion knew how to choreograph worship. They'd built a whole empire out of it. Kael didn't acknowledge them. He looked at me, not fully, not with the eyes of a man recognizing a face across years, with the eyes of an instrument sighting a target. My throat went tight. I widened my stance in the posture my handlers had drilled into. Unit 721. I let my left foot drag half a centimeter, the tell of fatigue. I let the muscles in my jaw slacken. A good servant showed his work. A good servant made the champion look better. The announcer voice softened, almost tender, and facing him, one of our finest reclaimed assets, a ghost of the lower districts, a blade sharpened by obedience, a body without will. Laughter rippled through the stands. I held still and absorbed it like a sponge. The collar at the base of my throat was cold against skin. The Dominion called it a restraint, a safety measure. It was really a statement. We own the distance between your heartbeat and your next breath. My handler's command thread buzzed faintly under the collar, a whisper in the nerves that could become pain with a simple flick of a switch. A chime in my left ear. Private channel. Obey. Perform. Die if requited. I let my eyes go unfocused, the vacant stare of a mindless thing. Inside, I counted, not seconds, not heartbeats, patterns. Kael shifted his weight forward, his right shoulder dipped. A microtell that used to mean he wanted to end things fast. He'd always hated prolonged showmanship. Always. My fingers flexed once, slow, like the movement belonged to someone else. I could already feel the arena studying the gesture, feeding it into 1,000 predictive models. In a world like this, even a twitch became data. The bell tone rang again. The kill grid under the sand woke up. It wasn't visible, but I felt it as a faint vibration through the soles of my feet. Segmented plates aligning, magnetic fields tightening, the arena deciding what physics would be allowed today. Kael moved first. He didn't sprint. He arrived. One step, and his shadow stretched over me. I lifted my arms late on purpose and let his first strike glance off my forearm guard with a clang that sounded satisfying to an audience. The impact punched heat into bone. His strength was real. Dominion had not made him weaker. I stumbled back 2 paces, too much, theatrically. Then, caught myself. The crowd approved, a swell of sound as reward. Kael's eyes didn't narrow with pride. They narrowed with calculation. He came again, fast, brutal, economical. A knee to my ribs, meant to collapse lungs. I rolled with it and let the sand grit cut my shoulder. He followed with a downward elbow that would have cracked my collarbone if I'd been where I pretended to be. I wasn't. I rotated under, stepped inside his guard, and, without thinking, hooked his wrist with the same grip we'd used in the training bays under Bastion's old hydroponic decks. His forearm tensed. Instinct answered. For half a heartbeat, we moved like we used to, like 2 bodies remembering the same song. Then his eyes flashed with something sharp and wrong, and he tore free with a violence that didn't match the rhythm. A Dominion correction. He reset his stance. Not the stance he'd chosen. The stance that was acceptable. My stomach dropped. I let my face go slack again before any camera could catch the flicker of emotion. Kael circled. The arena's light tracked him like a halo. He didn't speak. The champion rarely did. Silence made him mythic, but as he passed close, his voice dropped low enough to drown beneath the crowd. Your footwork is... He stopped, as if the next word was locked behind his teeth. I didn't react. Servants didn't respond. Kael's jaw flexed. His gaze flicked to the collar at my throat. Then he attacked again, harder. The Dominion wasn't content with a dance. It wanted blood. A panel in the arena floor slid open with a metallic sigh. A spear rack rose like a skeletal hand offering weapons to the gods. The crowd's roar rose with it. Kael chose a long blade, monomolecular edge, diamond hardened, the kind that could split armor without slowing. He didn't flourish it. He tested its weight once, then held it in the guard position that made my hands ache with remembered repetition. He advanced. I went to the rack and picked up the weapon they'd assigned me, a blunt-edged staff with shock nodes. Non-lethal for the champion, painful for the servant, safe for the spectacle. I twirled it once, sloppy, like someone who'd learned from a manual. Kael's eyes tracked the movement too closely. We closed. Steel and composite collided. My staff met his blade, and the shock nodes crackled uselessly against his armor. He pressed in, forcing me backward, dictating the pace. His blade scraped sparks off my guard. Sparks fanned into the air, caught by the dome's holograms, made to look like stardust. I let my heel slip. I let my shoulder dip. I let him think he was winning exactly the way the Dominion expected. But I watched his breathing. I watched the timing between his strikes. He didn't hesitate where Kael used to hesitate. He didn't look for openings where Kael used to look for openings. He wasn't showing off. The old Kael would have hated the crowd, but couldn't resist punishing the Dominion by making them wait. This Kael moved like an execution protocol. He aimed for joints, arteries, the throat. He aimed to end the fight. Something inside me went cold. I twisted my staff to catch his blade, locked it, and pushed, hard enough to force him to lean in. The cameras would see it as desperation. His face was close enough that I could see the faint line at his hairline where the Dominion had once installed a crown of needles. Close enough to see the tiny scars along the jaw where muscle stimulators had been threaded. Close enough to smell the antiseptic under his sweat. This wasn't just obedience. This was remodeling. His eyes met mine fully for the first time. There was no spark, no recognition, no flicker of humor at the absurdity of it all. Just a clean, pale focus, like a man looking through a scope. My grip almost failed. Kael's lips moved again, barely audible. "Do I know you?" The question hit me harder than his blade ever could. I let my face remain empty. I let my breathing remain ragged. I let the collar sit against my throat like a seal. I didn't answer. Servants didn't answer. Kael tore his blade free, severing the lock with a twist. He slashed low. I jumped back, but not fast enough. The edge kissed my thigh. Thin, precise, and warmth ran down into the sand. The crowd screamed approval. Pain is easy. Pain is honest. I let it show. I made a sound. Small, pathetic. Kael's eyes flicked to the blood. For a moment, something in him tightened, like a muscle trying to remember a different use. Then, the Dominion corrected it. His expression smoothed. He attacked. The arena changed. The kill grid beneath the sand surged. Gravity shifted a fraction. Enough to throw off an untrained fighter. Enough to make a servant stumble into a champion's blade. I adjusted without thinking, compensating with my core and hips, the way you do when you've fought on unstable platforms in shipyards and sabotage runs. I shouldn't have been able to. Kael saw it. His blade paused mid-arc, a microscopic delay. For the first time, his eyes narrowed with something other than calculation. Suspicion. The collar at my throat buzzed again. Handler thread reacting to my competence. Deviation detected. My nerves prickled with the promise of pain. I let my next step be wrong on purpose. I let myself fall to one knee. The sand glass bit into my palm. Kael closed distance, blade raised. The crowd rose with him, a single organism hungry for climax. His shadow fell over my bowed head. I looked down, not up. I made myself small. Inside, I counted patterns again. The dome's sensors, the drones hovering at the rim, the angles of the cameras, the time it took for the announcer to inhale before speaking. Kael's voice low. "Why didn't that throw you?" I stayed silent. He lowered his blade an inch. A hesitation, and not one the Dominion had scripted. He was fighting himself in tiny increments. I let my hands slide in the sand, fingers finding the seam of a floor plate. The arena's skin was segmented. It had to open, to shift, to change the game. Every seam was a potential weakness. Kael stepped closer. The blade's tip hovered near my throat. The collar buzzed, angry now. Oh, vey. Diaphragmoided. Pain bloomed in my neck. Just a taste, a warning. I made my body flinch like a creature conditioned by agony. Kael's eyes snapped to the collar again. His grip tightened. He didn't strike. The crowd's roar wavered, confused by the lack of blood. The announcer voice flowed in to fill the gap, syrupy with expectation. Finish it, Iron Star. Remind them why the sun bows. Kael's jaw worked. He lifted the blade again as if compelled, and then he did something wrong. He glanced up, past me, toward the royal box where the Dominion overseers sat behind polarized glass. He looked at them the way a man looks at a cage. It was a tiny rebellion, so tiny it could be dismissed as theatrics. But I saw it. Hope is dangerous, too. Kael's eyes returned to mine. For the briefest moment, something in his gaze softened, not recognition, but discomfort, like a hand brushing a scar. Then the softness vanished. A rigidness took its place, as if someone had tightened a screw inside his skull. He thrust. I rolled sideways. The blade punched into the sand where my throat had been. I came up low and swung my staff, not to strike, but to hook behind his knee, to topple him into a position that would bring our faces close again. Kael moved to counter exactly as the old Kael would have, and then he didn't. He overcorrected. He used a Dominion-approved response that put distance between us, that prevented contact, that kept him safe from whatever the arena feared. The cold in my chest deepened. They'd trained him not just to win, but to avoid the very things that might wake him. Kael advanced again, blade a line of death. I retreated, letting the fight travel where I wanted it, toward the eastern perimeter where the electrified barrier arced blue-white against the dome. The crowd saw a servant being driven to the edge. The cameras saw it too. That was fine. At the barrier, the kill grid hummed louder. The floor plates here were thicker. Underneath them ran power conduits and data lines feeding the dome's systems. Dominion architecture always hid its spine in plain sight. Kael lunged. I pivoted, let his momentum carry him closer than he intended, and, just for a breath, broke the servant mask. I met his eyes and let the truth of my attention touch him like a fingertip. Left, I said, so quietly it could be mistaken for a gasp. It was nothing. A single word. But it was a word we used to say to each other in training when someone's guard slipped. It meant, I'm here. Pay attention. Don't let them shape you. Kael froze. Not long. Half a heartbeat. But in a fight, half a heartbeat is a lifetime. His pupils widened, his brow furrowed. Something in him strained toward the sound like a plant turning toward light. Then pain crossed his face, sudden and brutal. He staggered as if struck, not by my weapon, but by something inside his skull. Dominion correction routines. I watched him grind his teeth, watched his hand tremble on the hilt. His eyes snapped back into focus, harder than before. And in that hardness was something worse than emptiness. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of what my voice had almost pulled from him. He attacked with savage speed, blade a flickering line. I barely got my staff up. The impact sent a jolt through my arms, nearly dislocating my shoulder. The barrier crackled inches from my back, hungry. The crowd went feral. Kael drove me into the edge, blade poised to finish. His face was close again, but now his eyes were locked, sealed. He hissed through clenched teeth, a sound meant only for me. Don't. The word was a plea wrapped in a threat. I felt the collar buzz, tasted copper as pain bit deeper into my throat. Deviation, deviation. I let my knees buckle. I let my head fall forward like a puppet's. Kael's blade hovered, shaking. The arena wanted a decisive ending. The Dominion wanted its champion to be a symbol. But Kael, whatever they had done to him, was still alive enough to suffer. My pulse hammered. I could end the performance here. I could let him kill me and take whatever future I'd built and pour it into the sand. Or I could do what I'd come here to do. Not today. Not with the entire Dominion watching. Not with the caller screaming. Not yet. I needed the right moment, the right angle, the right kind of contact, close enough to do more than exchange blows, but not so obvious that the overseers tightened their grip before the fracture could spread. Kael's blade pressed lightly against my collarbone. The edge was cold. It could have cut through skin with a thought. He stared down at me as if searching a face in a fog. His mouth moved almost silently. The word died. His eyes squeezed shut. His head tilted as if something inside him was yanking on a chain. He opened his eyes again, and they were gone. Those brief cracks. That brief almostness. The iron star returned. He raised the blade for the finishing strike. I lifted my staff weakly, the perfect servant's last pathetic defense, and turned my head so the cameras could see my submission. Inside, I chose. I wouldn't die as a spectacle. I wouldn't let him stay a weapon. If the Dominion had rewritten Kael into their champion, then I would have to rewrite the fight into something they couldn't predict. Kael's blade began to fall, and somewhere deep beneath the arena, behind the seams of floor plates and the hum of conduits, the system that kept this city obedient listened, ready to punish any deviation. I let the blade come close. Close enough. The chapter ends here, with steel descending and the first irreversible decision already made. Chapter 2. The Fracture Point. The blade fell like a verdict. I let it. Not into my throat. Never that. I turned at the last possible instant. Made it look like panic. Made it look like instinct. Steel bit into the collar instead of flesh, throwing a fan of sparks so bright the dome drank them and turned them into applause. The collar screamed, not in sound, in electricity. Pain lanced down my neck and into my teeth, turning my tongue numb. For a moment, my vision split into two offset copies of the arena, like the world couldn't agree on where to place itself. I collapsed forward, just as a servant would. Kael yanked his blade free and stepped back, expression unreadable. The crowd roared as if they'd been promised a death, and I'd merely delayed the gift. Above, the Dominion's gold lattice flickered. Round 2, elevation protocol the arena, began to change under our feet. Floor plates unlocked with a deep industrial groan. Segments rose and sank in slow, deliberate motions, creating ridges and troughs, like the ribs of something enormous shifting under its skin. The perimeter barrier brightened, crackling in sync with the moving grid. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a test chamber. I stayed on one knee, breathing hard, swallowing the metallic taste of my own blood where the collar had burned my throat. I let my shoulders shake. Inside, I ran the numbers. Elevation protocols meant line-of-sight breaks. It meant drones would dip lower to compensate. It meant more camera angles, more predictive modeling, more attention. It also meant the seam I'd found near the perimeter would widen as the plate shifted. Kael watched me the way you watch a trap you can't quite see. He should have finished me already. The Dominion wanted a clean end. The fact that I was still alive meant either Kael was indulging the crowd, or the corrections in his skull were fighting something they couldn't entirely suppress. Kael moved. Not toward me. Along the ridgeline that was rising between us, taking higher ground. His steps were perfect with the shifting plates, his balance too clean, as if his body had been calibrated to the arena itself. Of course it had. Champions weren't born here. They were engineered. I pushed myself up, favoring my wounded leg, letting it wobble. My staff felt heavy, my grip weak. The collar buzzed a warning again. The handler thread wanted me pliant. Predictable. A performance of defeat. Continue submission. I obeyed the words and disobeyed the intent. Kael came down the ridge in a glide that would have been beautiful if it weren't meant to kill. He slashed for my staff, trying to shear the shock nodes off and leave me with a stick. I caught the blade on the reinforced spine instead. Sparks sprayed. The impact drove me sideways into a trough that was sinking as I fell. Perfect. I rolled with it, using the descent to hide my hands for a fraction of a second from the drones above. My fingers found the seam between plates again, wider now, and slid along it until they touched the thin lip of a maintenance latch. There. The arena's skin had to breathe. Dominion engineers could gild the surface, but physics still demanded access points. Kael's boots hit the trough behind me. He didn't jump. He simply was there again, blade already in motion. I stumbled forward, exaggerated, like I couldn't climb the rising slope ahead. The crowd laughed, sound like breaking glass. Kael lunged. His blade grazed my back. A thin cut opened, hot and clean, and the pain sharpened my focus. Good. Pain keeps you honest. I snapped my staff up, caught his wrist and twisted. An old move, a familiar rhythm. For one beat, Kael's body responded the way it used to. His elbow bent. His shoulder rotated. It wasn't learned in the arena. It was learned somewhere else. Somewhere. With concrete floors and the smell of hydroponic algae, with alarms always humming faintly under the walls. His eyes widened again. Then, his face contorted, and he ripped away with a jerk that was too violent to be his own. He staggered back half a step. I saw his fingers flex against the hilt, as if he wanted to drop it and couldn't. The Dominion's correction routines were tightening. So was my window. I let my staff fall from my hands. A servant's mistake. A surrender. A desperate slip. The crowd howled approval. Even the announcer's voice purred with satisfaction. Kael hesitated just long enough to look at the fallen weapon, then at me. He didn't grin. He didn't gloat. He looked wary. Like a man standing over a creature that shouldn't be able to set a trap, and yet might have. I raised my empty hands. Palms out. Submission. Fear. Kael approached carefully. Pick it up, the announcer boomed, as if speaking to me. But the tone was for Kael. End this. Kael didn't obey the announcer. He leaned in, voice low enough to vanish beneath the crowd. Who taught you that lock? I let my gaze drift past him, unfocused. The servant mask demanded emptiness. But I couldn't resist one more thread tug. You did, I whispered. Not loud, not clear, a breath more than a word. Kael froze. It wasn't the clean, rigid freeze of correction. It was the freeze of a man hearing something through thick walls. His nostrils flared. His eyes flicked to my mouth. Like the sound had come from there, but the meaning had come from somewhere else. Then the pain hit him. He winced, a sharp, involuntary flinch, and a faint line of blood appeared at the corner of his nose. Internal pressure. Neural compliance forcing itself through flesh. He blinked hard. His gaze went flat again, and the flatness made me angrier than the blade ever could. Kael lifted his sword and placed the tip under my chin, not to kill, to force my face up for the cameras, so everyone could watch the champion look his opponent in the eyes before he ended him. My neck burned where the collar sat. My wound on my thigh throbbed in time with the arena's shifting hum. The drones adjusted, lenses iris clicking. I could feel their attention like heat on skin. If I moved wrong now, the overseers would see it. If I waited too long, Kael would cut. My embedded disruptor sat coiled along my lower ribs like a second set of nerves, an illegal weave of biotech and old insurgent hardware, grown into me over years, designed to be indistinguishable from scar tissue until I woke it. It had one job, not to restore Kael's memory. Memory is fragile. Memory can be rewritten. It was built to do something simpler, cruder, and therefore Harder to stop. Interrupt the Dominion's grip. Make the leash slip. Just long enough, but it needed contact. Not a strike, not a brush, a full circuit. Skin, bone, proximity to the crown line where the needles had been threaded into Kael's skull. I needed him closer. I needed him to choose to come close, so the drones would read it as intimacy of execution, not sabotage. I let my knees tremble. I let my breathing hitch. I let fear paint my face. Kael's blade tip pressed a fraction harder. A tiny prick of blood welled. He leaned in, almost unconsciously. The champion wanted to see my eyes when I died. The Dominion loved that moment. Kael's eyes searched mine. He looked like a man staring at a door he couldn't open. His lips parted. "Tell me," he began, and then the correction routine snapped tight again, jerking his expression shut. He raised his sword. The crowd rose with him. I moved, not away, toward him. I surged forward into the blade's arc, forcing Kael to abort the swing or cut himself in the follow-through. It wasn't a tactic a servant would use. It was reckless, irrational, desperate, which made it perfect. Kael reacted on instinct. He stepped back and shoved me away with his forearm. Hard, armor, plating grinding against my shoulder. The contact was almost enough. Almost. I fell and rolled with it, letting my hand slap the sand glass in an exaggerated scramble. I reached for my dropped staff, but didn't grab it. Instead, my fingers found the maintenance latch again. And this time, I pulled. It didn't open. Dominion locks weren't so simple, but it shifted. A hairline click transmitted up my arm. Beneath the plate, a conduit's vibration changed pitch. I didn't need the hatch to open. I needed the arena to give me a place to hide a pulse. Kael advanced again, blade high, fury sharpened by whatever pain the Dominion had fed into him. He wanted this to end now, not because the crowd demanded it, but because something inside him couldn't tolerate the pressure I was applying. The elevation protocol intensified. A ridge rose between us like a wall, forcing us to climb to meet each other. The vorpulimes adjusted, painting the rising plates with solar flares and falling ash, turning engineering into myth. We climbed. Kael reached the crest first. Silhouette framed against the dome light, he looked like a statue carved out of war. I reached the crest a beat later, stumbling, leg dragging. Kael's blade swung. I caught it, barehanded. The monomolecular edge should have taken my fingers, but I didn't grab the edge. I grabbed the flat, slapped my palm against it, hard enough to sting, and shoved it aside, stepping into his guard with my shoulder. It looked like insane bravery. It was alignment. My chest hit his armored torso. My hands found the plates at his collar, fingers slipping under the seam where skin met metal. Kael's breath hitched. Surprise! Real this time! His free hand snapped up, gripping the back of my neck, ready to break it. My collar sparked at his touch, a warning flare in my nerves. And in that instant, neck in his grip, face inches from his. Cameras drinking the moment I triggered the disruptor. It wasn't a button. It wasn't a thought command. It was a muscle pattern I'd grown into my body over years, disguised as a reflex. A specific contraction under my left ribs that collapsed, a biocapacitor, and dumped its charge into the contact points in my hands. The pulse traveled through the armor seam, through sweat-slick skin, into the crown scar line. Kael went rigid. His eyes flew wide. For a heartbeat, he looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Then his pupils blew out, and his expression broke, not into recognition, not into memory, but into raw, unfiltered presence. The Dominion's corrections screamed. I felt it more than I heard it, the arena's systems spiking, the drones pitching closer, the perimeter barrier flaring. Kael's hand tightened on my neck, but not to kill, to hold on, as if he were falling through himself and my bones were the only thing he could grab. "Kael," I said, and this time I didn't bother hiding the way the name lived in my mouth. His jaw trembled. Blood ran freely from his nose now. A thin red line tracked down to his lip. His eyes flicked, unfocused darting over my face as if trying to assemble it from fragments. Somewhere above us, the announcer's voice faltered for the first time. "Champion! Finish!" Static crawled through the dome's speakers. The Dominion didn't like uncertainty on camera. A new protocol flashed in gold above us, forced into the air like a threat. "Fail safe. Termination authority engaged." The floor under our feet vibrated as hidden emitters charged. The kill grid wasn't just meant to shape the fight. It was meant to end it when the narrative went off script. Kael made a sound that was half growl, half choke. His grip loosened. He looked at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. Then he looked past me, eyes snapping to the royal box with a clarity that hadn't been there before. Hatred, not theatrical hatred. The quiet, lethal kind. The kind Kael Vire used to carry when he talked about freedom like it was a debt the universe owed. For a moment, only a moment, I saw him, not the champion, not the Iron Star. My friend, resurfacing through pain. The arena screamed. The kill grid discharged. A lattice of blue-white energy webbed across the crest, crawling over plates and air, seeking muscle and nerve. The kind of current that could stop a heart or turn a mind into jelly. I grabbed Kael and threw us both sideways off the ridge. We hit the slope hard, rolled sparks snapping over our backs where the grid missed by centimeters. The crowd's roar turned into confused shouting. Drones dipped dangerously low. Kael stumbled to his feet like a man learning gravity from scratch. His blade slipped from his hand and embedded in the sand glass with a hiss. He stared at it, breathing hard, as if the weapon had betrayed him. Then he looked at me. His gaze wasn't empty now. It wasn't whole. It was awake. His mouth opened. "E," he began, and the syllables scraped out like it hurt. The Dominion tried to clamp down again. Kael's face twitched. His eyes fluttered. His knees buckled. I caught him. To the cameras, it looked like a servant supporting his victor in a moment of dramatic exhaustion. To me, it felt like holding a man in the middle of a storm, trying to keep him from being swept back under. "Stay with me," I murmured, forehead nearly touching his. "Just stay!" His eyes locked onto mine with desperate intensity. Then the arena's perimeter gates slammed shut with a sound like a coffin lid. Above us, the dome's holograms died, one by one, as the system diverted power to containment. The lights shifted from spectacle gold to emergency white. And for the first time since the bell rang, the crowd began to realize they weren't watching a show anymore. They were trapped inside it. Kael's fingers dug into my arm, not as a weapon, but as an anchor. His lips moved again, barely audible. "Help me." I tightened my grip. "I didn't come here to do anything else," I said. Then, the first kill drones dropped from the rim of the dome, sleek and black, their red optics painting targets onto the sand. The Dominion had seen enough. The main event was over. Now came the cleanup. Chapter 3. The Awakening Protocol. The first drone hit the arena air like a falling knife, then another, then a whole ring of them, descending from the dome's rim in synchronized silence. Sleek black bodies with stabilized thrusters, red optics scanning, targeting, deciding. The crowd didn't understand at first. They cheered, thinking it was part of the spectacle. The drones disabused them quickly. A warning tone punched through the speakers, stripped of pageantry. "All non-essential personnel remain seated. Compliance will be rewared." The royal box's polarized glass darkened to mirror black. The overseers were still there. They'd simply removed their faces from the story. Kael sagged against me, the weight of his armor suddenly too much for a body that had been held together by programming alone. The disruptor's pulse had cracked the Dominion's grip, but it hadn't replaced what they'd taken. It had only made room, thin, dangerous room, for choice to exist again, and the Dominion hated empty space. Kael's eyes were open, unfocused. His pupils stuttered, trying to lock onto me. Blood still traced his lip. He looked less like a myth now and more like a man who had been kept too long underwater. He started again, the same broken syllable, as if his mouth remembered my name before his mind could. A drone's optic swept over us. A thin red line crawled up my chest and paused at the base of my throat, right over the collar. I lowered my head, servant posture. I let my shoulders slump. I made my grip on Kael look like devotion, like the pathetic loyalty of a trained asset supporting its master. Inside, I was already moving. The maintenance latch I'd loosened at the ridge wasn't far. 2 troughs down, 1 ridge over. The arena's plates were still shifting, but the elevation protocol had slowed. The system was prioritizing containment and threat neutralization now. Threat neutralization meant predictable geometry. Predictable geometry meant a plan could breathe. Kael's sword was still stuck in the sand up on the crest, a glittering accusation. I didn't reach for it. A servant reaching for a champion's weapon would trigger the drones instantly. Instead, I slipped my hand under Kael's arm and began to drag him, one careful step at a time, toward the trough. The crowd's noise had changed texture. There were shouts now, questions, the brittle edge of fear. People were standing, until the drones aimed at them and the warning tone repeated. The Dominion didn't need love, it only needed stillness. A drone dipped lower, close enough that its thrusters kicked grit into my eyes. Its optic blinked, reading my heat signature. Kael's, the collar's ID broadcast. It didn't fire, not yet. Kael was too valuable to kill. His body was infrastructure. His image was glue. They'd try to capture him first. They'd kill me with no hesitation. Kael's fingers tightened suddenly around my forearm. His gaze snapped into focus, clearer than before. Violently so. He stared past my shoulder at the drones, then at the royal box, then down at the collar on my throat. His face twitched, as if his skull contained competing orders. "Don't move," he whispered, voice hoarse. "They'll..." A spike of pain cut him off. He grimaced, eyelids fluttering. "They'll what?" I murmured, keeping my mouth barely moving. To cameras, it could be prayer. Kael swallowed, throat working. "They'll take you." He said it like it was the worst outcome he could imagine. It hit me in the ribs, harder than any blade, because even with his mind shredded, even with his memories trapped behind Dominion locks, Kael still understood the shape of injustice, still understood who the Dominion devoured first. I tightened my grip. "I'm already taken," I said softly. "You're the one they can't afford to lose." Kael's eyes flickered, trying to reconcile the words with the world. A drone's red line tightened into a pinpoint on the side of my head. A second warning tone sounded, closer, more urgent. "Asset 721, release champion. Return to T-Ling position." The command thread in my collar buzzed, trying to inject compliance into muscle and nerve. A familiar pressure, like invisible fingers squeezing the base of my skull. I obeyed. I released Kael. I dropped to one knee. I lowered my head. Perfect servant. The drone's optic relaxed fractionally. The red dot moved off my skull. Kael swayed, nearly fell. He caught himself with a hand on the arena plate. His glove smeared blood on Dominion metal, and then, with the stiffness of a man fighting invisible strings, Kael lifted his head and looked directly at the drone. He spoke. Not to me. To it. "Stand down!" The words were quiet, almost casual. The drone paused, As if confused, the crowd surged with sound. Laughter, cheers, then confusion as nothing happened. Champions didn't talk to drones. Champions didn't challenge systems. Kael's jaw clenched. He repeated, louder, "Stand down." Something inside the arena's network stuttered. I felt it, not in my collar, but in the vibration under the plates. A tiny hitch in the power distribution, like the system had briefly hesitated to contradict him. Because Kael Vire wasn't just a man in this dome. He was an access key. The Dominion had fused him to its machinery so completely that obedience ran both ways. The drone's optic blinked twice. It did not stand down. A dart launcher unfolded from its underside with a crisp click. Non-lethal capture, likely. A needle that would put Kael back under without damaging the body. Kael's eyes widened, not with fear, but with comprehension. The last puzzle piece snapping into place. Even he was a slave. He moved, fast, not graceful, not choreographed. It was ugly, desperate motion, human motion. He lunged, grabbed the drone's chassis, and wrenched it down. The thrusters screamed in protest. The crowd erupted, thinking they were seeing a new kind of entertainment. Kael slammed the drone into the arena plate hard enough to dent the composite. The drone spasmed, red optic flaring. A second drone fired. A needle streaked through the air, too fast to track. I moved without thinking, hands snapping up, catching the dart against my palm with a sting that drove pain into bone. The needle skittered away into the sandglass. A servant shouldn't be able to do that. Every drone optic in the trough swung toward me at once. Red lines painted my face, my throat, my hands. My collar buzzed like a hive. Deviation, deviation, deviation. Kael looked at me, really looked, and something in his expression cracked open. Not memory, not fully, but trust. It's a strange thing, trust. It doesn't need names. It doesn't need history. It only needs one decision. I will believe you over them. Kael turned and swung the broken drone like a club into the second one as it dipped to fire again. Metal shrieked. Sparks fell like rain. The crowd sound turned from cheering into screaming. People were standing now, pushing, trying to reach exits that didn't open. Drones tracked them, lines of red stitching panic into the air. The Dominion didn't want a massacre in public. It wanted a lesson. Kael dropped the ruined drone and staggered, breath heaving. The correction routines in his skull fought back harder now that he was acting. His face contorted. Blood dripped from his nose again. He grabbed his own head with both hands, as if he could physically tear the Dominion out. I rose from my kneel, slowly, deliberately, letting the cameras see it. I didn't run. Running would mark me prey. Instead, I walked to Kael and took his wrists gently, pulling his hands away from his skull. "Look at me," I said. His eyes snapped to mine, wild. "I can't," he choked. "Yes, you can." I leaned in close enough that my breath warmed the inside of his helmless cheek. "You already did." He shook his head violently, like a dog trying to throw off water. "I don't know." "I know," I said. "That's enough." His eyes narrowed. Confusion and rage braided together. "Who are you?" The question hurt. Not because it was unexpected. I'd built my plan around it. It hurt because of how much he hated himself for asking it. I didn't answer. Not yet. Names were for safe rooms and quiet corners, not for arenas full of drones. Instead, I tilted my head toward the trough wall, toward the seam I'd been working. "Can you walk?" I asked. Kael's gaze flicked there. He swallowed. "Yes." "Then come." We moved, not up toward the crest and Kael's sword too exposed. Down, into the trough where the elevation protocol had created a shadow line beneath a raised plate. Drones hovered above, but their optics struggled with the angle and the crowd's chaotic heat signatures. Kael limped, but he moved with stubborn determination, like a man too angry to collapse. I guided him to the plate seam and dropped to a crouch, fingers sliding into the maintenance latch again. The latch was stiff, designed to resist tampering. My nails tore. Blood smeared the groove. Kael watched, breathing hard. "What are you doing?" "Opening the arena," I said. He gave a humorless laugh that sounded like a cough. "The arena doesn't open." "It does," I said. "For maintenance, for repairs, for bodies." He stared at me like he wanted to argue. Then his face twitched with pain as the correction routines surged again. "Help me," I said, and that phrase, those two words, seemed to land inside him. A command he could choose to obey. Kael crouched beside me. His armored fingers hooked under the plate lip and pulled. The latch snapped. The plate shifted, exposing a narrow maintenance channel beneath. A dark space filled with conduits, coolant pipes, and the steady hum of the arena's nervous system. Warm, dusty air breathed up from it, smelling faintly of ozone and oil. I looked at Kael. "Down!" He hesitated. Not because he didn't want to go. Because the Dominion had trained him to fear darkness that wasn't curated. I took his hand, skin to skin, no armor between us, and squeezed once. A quiet signal. Kael's breath caught. Then he nodded, then we dropped into the channel. The plate above slid shut a second later with a heavy click. The roar of the crowd muted instantly. Above us, the arena became distant thunder. Below, the Dominion's true sound emerged. The low, constant hum of power and control. We crouched in the maintenance crawl space, lit only by the faint blue glow of conduit lines. Kael's chest rose and fell hard. His eyes darted, adjusting, seeking threats. I exhaled slowly, forcing my pulse down. "Where?" Kael started, then stopped, hand flying to his head as pain flared again. I caught his elbow. "It's okay. It's just the corrections fighting. They'll spike harder when you resist." He stared at me with raw anger. "You know a lot." "I had to," I said. Kael's lips peeled back. "Who did this to me?" I didn't point upward. I didn't say Dominion Overseers Helion. Instead, I said the truest thing I could say right now. "People who needed you to be useful instead of free." Kael's eyes burned. "And you?" I met his gaze. Held it. "I'm the reason you're here," I said. His expression froze. Shock. Betrayal. Confusion. Before it could harden into something dangerous, I added quickly, "Not like that. Not the way you think." Kael's hands trembled. "Then explain." I shook my head once. "Not here. Not with your head on fire. Not with drones above us." Kael's jaw worked. He was fighting an instinct to demand truth immediately. It was almost comical. Kael always impatient, always wanting to act, forced into stillness. I reached into the lining of my torn arena tunic and pulled out a small object wrapped in insulated cloth. A contact spike. Not the disruptor. That was part of me. This was its second half. A shard of contraband hardware, shaped like a flattened needle with a conductive pad. It looked like scrap. It was not. Kael's eyes fixed on it with immediate suspicion. "What is that?" "The rest of the fracture," I said. He blinked. "You already." That was a pulse. I held the spike between my fingers. "A slap, enough to wake you, not enough to keep you awake." Kael's throat bobbed. "So what does that do?" "It gives you leverage," I said. "It lets you push back at the exact point they're holding you." I tapped the faint scar line at his hairline with my free hand. Kael flinched as if touched by a live wire. "Don't," he hissed. "I know," I said softly, "but you have to let me." Kael's eyes were frantic. "If you do that, they'll know," I agreed. "They already know something's wrong." The fail-safe engaged. The drones. The lockdown. Kael's breathing slowed a fraction. He was listening now. I continued, voice low, steady. This arena isn't just for blood. It's their relay, their control node. Every collar, every obedience implant in this city roots through here. They built it under the spectacle, so nobody would question why the power draw never dips. Kael's eyes widened, and for a moment, true comprehension cut through the pain. They used me, he whispered. They used all of us, I said. Kyle's gaze flicked to my collar again. I'm not rewritten, I said before he could ask. I'm under cover. The words hung in the dark like a match flare. Kyle stared at me as if he couldn't decide whether to believe it. You're what? His voice cracked. Then why? Why were you on your knees? Why didn't you? Because the moment I look like a leader in there, I die in there, I said, and you go back under. Kyle's hands clenched into fists. So you planned this? Yes. His jaw trembled. You planned to fight me? Yes. Kyle's eyes flashed with rage and pain and a deep, terrible humiliation. You planned to let me almost kill you. Yes, I said again, and forced myself to hold his gaze. Because that was the only way to get close enough to wake you without the overseers catching the intent before it happened. Kyle swallowed hard. How long? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know, because the number would hurt him. Long enough for you to become their champion, I said carefully. Kyle let out a broken sound and looked away, as if the walls of the crawl space were suddenly too close. The correction routine surged again. Then he doubled over, palm pressed to his forehead. I reached for him. Kyle! He slapped my hand away reflexively, then immediately looked horrified at himself. I'm sorry, he rasped, voice strangled. I can't! I know, I said. And this time, I didn't offer my hand again. I sat back on my heels, giving him space to keep what dignity he still had. After a moment, Kael's breathing steadied. He looked at me again, eyes glassy with pain. You said, you're the reason I'm here, he whispered. I nodded. I put myself inside the servant system to get close enough to the arena's relay. I needed a way to reach the champion, to reach you. I thought. I swallowed. I thought you'd be fighting from the inside. Still you. Still aware. Kael gave a harsh laugh. I'm not. I know, I said. And I didn't know how bad it was until you looked at me like a stranger. Kael's gaze dropped to the spike in my hand. So what now? Now, I said. We take the arena's spine. Kael frowned. We're under it. Not the spine, I corrected. The heart. I pointed along the crawl space. Conduits ran in neat bundles labeled in Dominion code. A thicker trunk line pulsed with a faint rhythmic low. Kael followed my gesture. That line. Primary uplink, I said. It leads to the relay core under the royal box. Kael's eyes sharpened. Under them, yes. His lips curled. Good. The simple word carried a promise. A vibration tremored through the crawl space. Above, something heavy moved. A muffled boom, doors sealing. The arena was reconfiguring, turning itself into a cage. Time tightened. Kael looked at me, and in his gaze I saw a decision settling. Not memory, not comfort. Commitment. Do it, he said. I blinked. Do what? He pointed at his crown scar line with a trembling finger. The spike! My stomach nodded. Kael, if I push too hard, I could fry the interface. You could seize. You could... You already watched me almost cut your throat, he snapped, then immediately softened, voice raw. If I go back under, I won't get another chance, will I? I didn't lie. No, I said. Kael closed his eyes. Then do it. I scooted closer, careful. I unwrapped the spike. The conductive pad caught the conduit glow and gleamed faintly. Kael tilted his head down, exposing the scar line at his hairline. My fingers hovered. I hesitated, not because I doubted the plan, but because it was obscene to touch a friend's mind like this, even to free it. Liberation and violation can look identical from the wrong angle. Kael's voice, quiet. Don't be gentle. I swallowed and pressed the spike to the scar line. Kael's entire body arched. He made a sound that wasn't a scream, but wanted to be. His fist slammed into the conduit floor, metal ringing softly. The correction routines in his skull fought like cornered animals, trying to clamp shut. The spike warmed under my fingertips as it completed the circuit. My embedded disruptor responded. Biocapacitors tightening, charge patterns aligning, a resonance traveling up my arms. Kael's eyes flew open. For one heartbeat, there was nothing in them. Then there was too much. Images flashed across his face in micro-expressions. Shock, grief, rage, recognition. So fast I couldn't track which belonged to which memory. His mouth opened, and a name came out. Not mine. His. Kael, he whispered, like he'd found it buried in rubble. Then, like a second wave breaking behind the first, his gaze snapped to me with a clarity that punched air from my lungs. Eron, he said. My throat closed. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't cinematic. It was small, cracked, real. As if he'd been calling for me in his sleep for years and had finally woken up enough to say it out loud. I nodded once because anything more would break me. I'm here. Kael's face twisted, grief ripping through him. What did I? He choked. What did they make me do? We don't have time, I said gently, because the answer would drown us. Later. Kael's eyes flicked upward toward the muffled roar of the crowd and the drones. The champion mask was gone now. In its place was the man beneath. Bloodied, furious, awake. Then now, he said, voice low. Lethal. We make them pay. We move. The crawl space narrowed, forcing us to go single file. I led, counting junctions by conduit labels, following the thick uplink trunk. The Dominion's architecture was consistent. Show above, control beneath. Redundancy everywhere. Kael followed, quieter than his armor should allow. He moved like he was relearning himself, testing each step, each breath, as if expecting invisible strings to yank him back. Once, his hand brushed my shoulder for balance. The touch was brief, but it steadied him. Above, the arena's noise rose and fell in panicked waves. The Dominion was trying to regain narrative control, trying to keep the crowd seated while it hunted us. A muffled announcement bled through the floor plates, distorted. Temporary interruption, champion extraction, remain calm. Kael snorted. Extraction, he muttered. Let them think they're extracting you, I whispered. They'll move resources toward your usual routes. We take the routes they forgot they built. We reached a junction where the crawl space widened into a service node, a maintenance hub with tool racks, coolant valves, and a ladder leading up to a sealed hatch. I stopped. The hatch above was labeled in Dominion code, Spectator Services, Authorized only. Kael leaned close. That goes where? Under the lower stands, I said. It's the shortest path to the relay core. Kael's eyes narrowed. And the most watched? Yes, I admitted. But the drones are focused on the arena floor right now. The crowd is chaos. Surveillance will be noisy. Kael's hand tightened around the edge of the ladder. Open it? I went to the hatch control panel. It was biometric. I didn't have the code, but Kael did, whether the Dominion wanted him to or not. Your hand, I said. Kael placed his palm on the plate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel chirped, and the lock disengaged with a soft sigh, almost polite. The hatch opened into a service corridor beneath the stands, a narrow, dim passage lined with pipes and cable trays. Above us, muffled through layers of metal, thousands of voices churned like a storm in a jar. We moved fast, keeping low, hugging the wall where shadow pooled. At the end of the corridor, a grated vent looked out into a spectator concourse. Through the slats, I saw people in Dominion finery, pushing, shouting, trying to reach sealed exits. Security enforcers in white armor held them back with stun batons, barking compliance. Drones floated above, optics flashing red. In the middle of the chaos, servants, real servants, not fighters, stood frozen with trays in their hands, eyes wide and blank. Collars on their throats glinted under emergency lights. Kael's breath hitched. They're everywhere. Yes, I said. That's why it has to be the relay. If we free the servant network, the Dominion loses its hands. Kael looked at me sharply. Free them how? I didn't answer immediately because the truth was heavy. The relay doesn't just send commands, I said. It syncs the collars. It keeps everyone in the same submission rhythm. If we break that rhythm, if we introduce noise, collars will fail open. Not all at once, but enough. Kael's eyes narrowed. A city-wide disruptor. I nodded. A broadcast. Kael's jaw tightened. And you can do that. Yes, I said. He stared. Why you? Because I've been inside their system long enough that my neural signature can pass as an authorized update, I said. My undercover isn't just pretending to be obedient. It's being wired into their network without them realizing I'm not theirs. Kael's gaze slid to my collar. That thing. It's real, I said. I let them collar me. I needed it. Kael's face contorted with something like guilt. You. Later, I said again, sharper this time. If we survive, you can be angry at me for the rest of our lives. But right now, we have a relay to burn. Kael's eyes softened. Just a fraction, then hardened into purpose. Where's the core? I pointed down the concourse. Under the royal box. They built a shrine on top of their control node. Kael's lips curled. Of course they did. We slipped out through another service hatch into the underside of the concourse, moving between support struts and cable bundles, using the chaos above as cover. We weren't invisible. We were just less interesting than the panicking crowd, until we reached the stairwell that led directly up toward the royal box. 2 Dominion enforcers stood at the top landing, rifles angled down, scanning for threats. Their helmets reflected emergency lights in sterile white. Kael stopped, body going still. I could feel his rage vibrating through him, wanting to explode. I grabbed his forearm. Not like this, I whispered. They'll sound the full alarm. Kael's eyes flicked to me. Then how? I scanned the struts, the pipes. The Dominion loved redundancy. There would be an alternate access. There, behind a wall panel marked ventilation service. The seam was barely visible. Here, I said. We pried it open with our fingers, slipping into another narrow maintenance shaft that ran parallel to the stairwell. Hot air rushed past, smelling of bodies and electronics. We climbed, crawling upward in a cramped spiral, hearing the enforcers' boots through the wall. At the top, a thin grate separated us from the underside of the royal box itself. Through it, I could see their feet, polished boots, expensive fabric. The Dominion's ruling class standing behind polarized glass, watching their arena become a problem. I could hear them now, muffled voices, sharp, irritated, frightened in the way people get when something they own starts acting like it belongs to itself. Kael's face was a mask of hatred. I pressed a hand to his chest, steadying, warning. If you rush them. I won't, Kael said, voice like steel drawn slow. Not until you start the broadcast. Good. He was learning restraint again. I pulled the grate loose carefully, centimeter by centimeter, and slid out into the service cavity beneath the royal box. The relay core was here. It wasn't a single machine. It was a cluster, black cylinders and fiber bundles, humming with power, wrapped in gold-labeled Dominion casing like sacred relics. At the center was an interface pedestal with 2 palm plates. 2. Kael stared at it. 2-factor. I nodded. Champion access and servant network access. They thought it made them safe. Kyle's eyes burned. It makes them vulnerable. I stepped to the pedestal. My hands hovered over the plates. Kael moved beside me, placing his palm on one plate without hesitation. His scars caught the conduit glow. His blood smeared the metal. I placed my palm on the other. The pedestal came alive. A warm, invasive hum flooded up my arm and into my spine as the system recognized my collar, my signature, my years of false obedience. Data rushed, thick and fast, like a river suddenly given permission to drown you. My vision blurred at the edges. Symbols flickered in my peripheral vision. Dominion code overlays, status lines, node maps. I gritted my teeth and held on. Kael's hand tightened on the plate. His breath came in harsh pulls. He was feeling it too, his body being treated like a key in a lock. A voice rose from the pedestal, synthetic and calm. Champion? Asset link verified. Authorization, conditional. Purpose, containment. The Dominion had already pivoted. They were using the relay to pull Kael back under, to overwrite him again, harder, cleaner. Kael's face twisted. He tried to pull his hand away. The pedestal held him, a magnetic grip. The system didn't ask permission from keys. Kael, I snapped. Hold! Hold! His eyes flared with panic. It's pulling. I know, I said, voice strained. My embedded disruptor screamed in my ribs, responding to the relay's signal like an instrument resonating with a louder note. If you let go, they'll seal the node and you'll be theirs again. Kael's jaw clenched, his gaze locked on mine. Trust. Again. He held. I forced my mind into the data stream, searching for the broadcast channel. The relay map spun in my vision. Nodes across the city, each caller a tiny obedient light, synchronized and steady. Servant network, training collars, workforce collars, gladiator restraints, a million leashes. I found the signal pattern that kept them in rhythm, an oscillation embedded in every command pulse, and I did the simplest, ugliest sabotage there is. I introduced noise, not random noise, not a blast. Noise shaped like freedom, like a mind refusing a command, like a heartbeat that wouldn't sync. I pushed my disruptor's resonance into the pattern, amplifying it through the relay core. The pedestal vibrated, heating under my palms. Pain bloomed along my nerves as the system fought to reject the corruption. Opposite, Kael cried out, body shuddering. Blood ran freely now. His eyes rolled back for a moment, then snapped forward again, furious, anchored by sheer will. Above us, the royal box voices shifted, alarm rising. Someone slammed on the glass. Someone shouted an order. The polarized glass began to slide open. Kael's head jerked up, eyes blazing. Eron, he rasped. Now! I'm almost... I gritted out. The glass finished opening. An overseer in gold-trimmed armor stepped out, face pale with rage. Behind him, more. Enforcers with rifles already raising. Kael's free hand, his hand not trapped by the pedestal, snatched his helm from the floor where the Dominion had likely left it as a contingency. He didn't put it on. He threw it. The heavy metal dome slammed into the overseer's face with a sickening crunch. The man went down. Enforcers fired. Bolts of blue energy flashed through the service cavity, scorching walls, cracking conduit casings. The relay core sparked angrily. Kael twisted his body, shielding me as best he could with his armored shoulder and back. taking glancing hits that made his muscles spasm. He didn't let go. He didn't break. He held the key in place while bullets tried to rewrite him by force. I shoved harder into the relay. The noise pattern expanded, propagating node to node like a cascade. On the relay map in my vision, obedient lights began to flicker. One winked out, then another, then a cluster. Across the city, collars would be buzzing, overheating, failing open. People would be dropping trays, pausing mid-swing, blinking like waking from a dream. The Dominion's hands were loosening. I felt the system resist with a sudden, brutal surge, an attempt to isolate the infected channel, to sever my access. My disruptor coil in my ribs heated to a painful burn. My muscles trembled. If I pushed too hard, I'd burn out my own nervous system. If I stopped now, the signal would die before it spread far enough. Kael's voice strangled. "Do it?" I looked at him, bloodied, shaking, awake, and understood what he meant. Not try, finish, even if it costs. I drew a breath and dumped everything. Every stored charge, every resonance pattern, every hidden subroutine I'd grown inside my body, into the relay core. The pedestal screamed, a high keening sound that set my teeth on edge. Kael convulsed, eyes wide, but he stayed. He stayed like a man choosing pain over chains. The relay map exploded in my vision, lights flickering, collapsing, then reappearing as something else. Independent pulses, asynchronous, unsynced, free. The collars were failing open across the network. The Dominion's control rhythm shattered. In the concourse beyond the royal box, I heard it. The crowd scream shifting into a different kind of sound as enforcers suddenly hesitated, as servants dropped to their knees, not in submission, but in shock, hands flying to their throats as collars sparked and popped loose. The overseers shouted. Their voices were suddenly small. They were just people now, standing on a shrine with their god dying beneath their feet. The pedestal's grip released all at once. Kael stumbled back, ripping his palm free, and dropped to one knee, retching blood onto the conduit floor. His eyes were open, wild, but he was himself. I sagged, my arms numb, my vision tunneling. The relay core smoked, gold casing blackened. Sparks fell like dying stars. Kael looked up at the overseers, and they looked back at him with something I had never seen on Dominion faces before. Fear, real fear. Kael stood, not as a champion, as a man who had just remembered what a tyrant looks like up close. He picked up a broken conduit bar from the floor. Crude, heavy. He didn't charge. He didn't rage. He walked forward with calm, murderous purpose. The enforcers raised rifles, and then, behind them, someone screamed. Not from the crowd, from the royal box. A servant in fine livery, collar half melted, had grabbed an overseer from behind. The servant's eyes were wide and wet with sudden selfhood. "I remember," the servant sobbed, voice breaking. "I remember my name," the overseer thrashed, suddenly helpless in the grip of a person he'd assumed was furniture. More servants surged, more enforcers hesitated, hands twitching at their own collars, faces contorting as their obedience implants stuttered and failed. The Dominion's order dissolved into human panic. Kael glanced back at me. I was sliding toward the floor, my body heavy, my nerves still buzzing with aftershock. He crossed to me in 2 strides, dropping to catch me before my skull hit the metal. "Eron," he said, urgent. I tried to speak. My mouth felt full of sand. I managed and coughed. "It's out." Kael's forehead pressed to mine for a moment, grounding, fierce. "You did it." I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the arena above wash through the floor. It wasn't one roar anymore. It was thousands of separate voices, chaotic, terrified, awake. Not done, I whispered. They'll try backup relays. Kyle's hand tightened around my shoulder. Then we move. He lifted me, armor and all, like my weight was nothing, like he was angry at gravity for daring to slow him down. We pushed out of the service cavity into the concourse. The scene above was no longer a controlled spectacle. It was a city's nervous system in spasm. Servants stood in clusters, hands on their throats, collars lying on the floor like dead snakes. Some cried. Some laughed hysterically. Some stared at their own hands as if seeing them for the first time. Enforcers, some, had dropped their weapons, confusion written across faces no longer synchronized to Dominion command. Others still fought, but without the certainty that obedience would protect them. They looked suddenly mortal. The crowd, Dominion citizens in finery, was pressed against sealed exits, shouting demands that no one obeyed. Drones hovered overhead, optics flickering, unsure which targets still counted as compliant. Kael moved through it like a blade through fabric, not cutting indiscriminately, but carving a path. Disarming, striking only when necessary, using his body to shield the newly freed when panic turned violent. We headed for the service stairwell that led down into the deeper understructure. Because the relay core was burning, but the Dominion was an empire. It had redundancies. It would try to reassert. We needed to keep the heart from restarting. As we reached the stairwell, a Dominion officer stepped into our path. Higher rank, armor marked with solar sigils. His collar wasn't a collar. It was an embedded neck plate, the kind that didn't fail open. He leveled a weapon at Kael. "Champion," he said, voice tight. "Stand down." Kael laughed once, short and cold. "No." The officer's eyes flicked to me in Kael's arms. "Asset 721, return to service. Your deviation will be." I looked at him, and for the first time, I let him see my awareness. I let him see the contempt. "I'm not your asset," I said hoarsely. The officer's face tightened. He fired. Kael moved faster than thought. He twisted, taking the shot on his shoulder plate. The impact jolted him, but didn't drop him. He kept moving forward, closing distance with the officer in 2 steps. The officer fired again. Kael smashed the weapon aside with his forearm, then drove the conduit bar into the officer's knee. Bone cracked. The officer screamed and fell. Kael loomed over him. The officer gasped, trying to crawl backward. "You can't! Without us! There's no order!" Kael crouched, face close, voice quiet and furious. "There was never order," he said. "Only fear you called law." He stood and walked past, leaving the officer alive but broken. Not mercy. Message. We descended into the understructure, into the arteries of the arena, where the Dominion had hidden its real machinery. The hum down here was different now, ragged, uneven, as if the building itself was startled by its own newfound instability. Kael's grip on me never slipped. "I remember you," he said suddenly, voice rough. I blinked, vision swimming. "Do you?" Kael's jaw clenched. "Not everything, but enough. Enough to know you didn't do this to me." "They did." A bitter warmth rose in my chest. "Good." Kael swallowed. "You said you came to free me." "Yes," I whispered. He tightened his hold. "And the others?" I smiled weakly. "That too." We reached another junction. Another relay node, smaller, humming as it tried to take over. I could see its status lights through the casing, spinning up, seeking synchronization, searching for the missing rhythm. Kael set me down gently against the wall. "Can you walk?" "I can," I lied. Kael saw the lie and didn't call it out. He simply braced his shoulder under my arm, sharing weight. "Tell me what to break," he said. I lifted a shaking hand and pointed at the node's primary conduit. That. Cut it. Not the casing. Just the feed. Kael nodded once and swung the conduit bar. Metal snapped. Sparks burst. The node's lights died. Above us, somewhere in the city, another cluster of collars would fail open. Another group of people would inhale and realize they were their own. We moved again, node by node, cut by cut, until the arena's hum began to fade, not into silence, but into a different kind of sound. The messy, unsynchronized vibration of a building, no longer functioning as a cage. Eventually, we emerged into an exterior service exit at the base of the arena's superstructure. Cold night air hit my face like a slap. The megacity sprawled beneath the arena, in layers of metal and light, towers rising like needles toward the star-streaked sky. Farther out, ships hung in orbital lanes like beads on wires, and across the city, lights were changing. Not the arena's lights. People's lights. Windows flaring open, doors unlocking, crowds forming not around spectacles, but around each other. Sirens wailed. Drones buzzed in confused swarms. Fires started in pockets where panic met opportunity. A city waking up is never quiet. Kael stood beside me, breathing hard, looking out over the chaos with an expression I couldn't read. He was free, and he was seeing the cost of freedom in real time. I leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally winning. My nerves felt stripped, raw, like I'd been turned inside out. Kael's hand came to my shoulder, steady. "Eron," he said softly, and this time the name didn't crack. It landed. I looked up at him. He stared out at the city, then down at me, eyes fierce. "What do we do now?" I swallowed, throat still scorched from the collar. "We keep moving," I said. "We find the people who remember how to build something that isn't a cage." Kael nodded slowly. Then he looked back toward the arena, toward the dome that had once made him a god. Its lights were dim now, flickering. The holograms were dead. The great golden lattice of Dominion narrative had collapsed into plain steel and emergency strobes. Kael exhaled, a long breath like he'd been holding it for years. "They'll come for us," he said. "Yes," I agreed. Kael's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile, but was close. "Let them," he said. He helped me stand. Together, we stepped off the arena's shadow and into the city's wild, uncertain light. Two men who had been turned into symbols and had chosen at last to be people. Behind us, the arena continued to fail, its control systems sputtering and dying like a star collapsing in on itself. Ahead of us, the first true sounds of a rebellion spread through the streets. Not a chant rehearsed for cameras, but names spoken aloud, remembered, reclaimed. Thank you for listening. If you like this story, please subscribe for more.